Hi, everybody. Mitch Tanenbaum here. Thanks for joining me today. This is the Security News Update for October 9th, 2022. In the Security and Privacy Alerts category, we're seeing the feds going after companies that are required to preserve their communications. Mostly that's financial institutions. That could be broker-dealers or registered investment advisors or banks or people like that. But there's probably other platforms where that's the case. So far, they have fined a group of financial institutions about $1 billion, a little bit more than $1 billion. So, it's serious. The other category of folks that fall into this trap are companies who have been served a notice that someone is intending to sue them, and as a result of that, they're required to preserve evidence. Lawsuits are probably a lot more common than financial institutions. There's a lot smaller number of them. Particularly, we've seen cases in the past, cyber cases, where companies have not been able to produce evidence, and the judge says to the jury, assume that the inability of the company to produce the evidence means that the evidence would harm them, and move forward under that presumption. So there's kind of a presumed guilty until shown to be innocent kind of strategy there. So I think that's worthwhile at least considering and understanding what your strategy is going to be. But certainly, if you allow people to use their own devices and their own messaging apps, then you run that risk. Next, in the security alerts, hackers claim to have breached the Russian satellite network GoNets. These are pro-Ukrainian hackers. These are low Earth orbit satellites, so those are similar to the satellites that Elon Musk is putting up, and Facebook and everybody else. There's lots of folks doing that. And the Russians have attempted to hack Starlink. They haven't been successful yet, but it doesn't mean they won't be in the future. What that means is apparently this is considered a fair target. In the case of the Russian system, um, they were able to compromise a CRM database, and it turns out that the system needed the CRM database in order to figure out who was a paying customer and who was not. So they did eventually get it back, and it's back up. But this all goes to your disaster recovery and business continuity strategy. What's your plan there? In the reference section, CISA and Department of Justice have issued an advisory on how a unnamed defense contractor was breached. I think I have a pretty good clue of who the contractor was, but they're not saying who it was. They were in there for quite a while, and this particular advisory gives a lot of detail in terms of how the bad guys got in. So, word to the wise, the bad guys are after things, and if they're successful, then that's obviously a problem for you guys. In the legislative and legal section, Indonesia is kind of leading the pack here in terms of scariness of laws. They've just passed a data protection law that includes 8 year. It's taken them 8 years to get there, up to 5 years in prison for the illegal collection of personal data, and a bunch of other things. So, don't know whether this is going to be something that we're going to see other countries follow suit, but certainly, um, uh, you know, throwing people in jail for illegally collecting data is something that should scare the bejeebers out of people. And certainly anybody that is a multinational, you have to worry about worldwide laws and not just laws in the United States. Uh, Nobody loves the robocalls that they get. I get zillions of them. I'm sure you do too. The FCC is threatening to pull carriers off their complying list as a result of them not doing a good job of blocking robocalls at the input side. Um, they could do this. This would be an interesting strategy. They've never done this before. The reason why they're proposing to do this is because under current law, the FCC is not allowed to initiate lawsuits. All they can do is ask the DOJ, Mother, please, would you file a lawsuit on our behalf? And the DOJ is worried about other stuff, and they typically don't get around to it. So this could be interesting. And if they block these carriers, that will be 100% of their revenue, at least coming into the United States. And that's probably enough motivation to get these guys to clean up their act. So that might hopefully reduce the number of robocalls that we all get. We shall see. In another case on the legal front, a hacker, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, of the Republic of Georgia, was sentenced to 25 years for a business email compromise scam. That seems like a long time. And he only netted about $9.5 million out of the deal. So, certainly 25 years should be a deterrent to folks. But the problem is, for the most part, we can't catch these guys. So, yeah, occasionally we catch them and we throw them in jail, but that's not going to be a big deterrent because there's just not enough of them being caught. And then also in the legal front, the U.S. continues to try to come up with a replacement for Privacy Shield. You may remember that the Court of Justice of the European Union struck down the last attempt, which is a replacement for Safe Harbor, which the Court of Justice also struck down. This has some more pieces to it. We'll see whether that is going to be satisfactory to the Court of Justice, but it's going to be years before it ever gets there. So in the meantime, at least, this is a good thing. It sounds like it's going to take maybe about 6 months to work out the details and get it all down in writing. But right now, U.S. companies that are moving data between the European Union and the United States are relying on a standard contract clause. They're very complex to implement, and most companies are just hoping that they're not going to get whacked. And legitimately, if you're a small company, you're probably not going to get whacked. But it certainly would be nice if we had a framework which both sides had agreed to, instead of just hoping that you don't get hit by somebody who's mad at you. On the education side, in getting ready for the elections next month, the Department of Justice has released an alert on how they think foreign governments are going to go off and try to interfere with the election. It's going to be manipulation. It's going to be creating bogus accounts. It's going to be posting bogus stuff. And they make some recommendations in terms of how to deal with it. You can download a copy of the PSA from a link in the print version of the Security News Update. In the breaches section, we got a couple of whoppers here. One is there's a guy, Jared Delkey, who worked for the National Security Agency as an information system security designer in Colorado Springs. He worked for the NSA for less than a month. In that time, he was able to steal some top secret information. You'd think after Snowden, the NSA would get their act together and actually be able to stop people from stealing stuff. But apparently that's not the case. He tried to sell it to what he thought were foreign agents. Turns out they were undercover FBI agents. That didn't work out so good for him. But this is still continues to be, and again, is embarrassing for the NSA that they can't get their act together and they hire people who are really spies. Turns out this guy had a lot of debt, so that might have been an indicator. But there's probably a number of people who work for the agency who have debt, so that's probably not a sufficient indicator. But clearly they were watching the guy, and it's also possible that maybe as a probationary employee, you may have to watch them more carefully. But I guess two things here. One is they clearly don't have their arms around the problem, and number two, they did actually catch the guy. So all that is good. So with that, we'll move on to hackers. I was telling you about this DoD contractor that got hacked. The government has released an alert about state-backed hackers. It's probably all tied together, using a custom version of a particular piece of malware called covalent malware and the Packet framework. They stole this from, as I said, a DoD contractor. The bad guys were in there almost a year before they were detected. And it looks like there were multiple different hackers inside the organization. So, one more time, the basic stuff, making sure you have patches in place and making sure people don't go off and compromise their credentials are good things. But on the other side of that, you also want to go off and make sure that you can detect it. And the bad guys can't be in there for a year before you finally do detect them. So, all of that is, not good. Black Cat, who is the hacking group that claimed to have done this, says they're going to be releasing information in tranches every 12 hours. They haven't done that yet. That's maybe due to a hacking failure on our part. We often knock them offline, but nonetheless, that doesn't mean that they're not going to. It just means they haven't yet. Also, in the breaches department, the city of Tucson announced that they were breached. I kind of say this is kind of unfair on the part of hackers to go off and attack someone who is pretty much defenseless. And I thought most municipalities here, they don't have the money, they don't have the people, they don't have the inclination, they don't have the oversight, they don't have any of that, unlike many private enterprises. But they got hit to the tune of 120 some odd thousand people. And information compromises the normal stuff: names, addresses, social security numbers, licenses, passports. It appears this was a result of a credential compromise. My guess is, although they're not saying, that they did not have multi-factor authentication enabled. Again, basic stuff. But what they're offering for these people is, gee, we'll give you some credit monitoring. And given that you've been a victim of 9 other breaches and you already have 9 credit monitoring services, a 10th one is probably not going to help you very much. But I think they feel like they got to do something, even though it's not going to be very useful to people. The city, of course, says, after the horses were out of the barn and the barn was set on fire, they moved quickly to investigate. But I'm not convinced that even that is true. They said they learned of the attack on May 29th. It took them 2 months, more than 2 months, to figure out what was taken. Again, this goes back to what you're logging and alerting on, so that it doesn't take you 2 months. Remember, for most places, excuse me, you're required to notify people within 30 days. So if it takes you 2 months to figure out what was taken, and then another month it took them to actually review that, so that was 90 days, they're probably not complying with any of the state privacy breach notification laws. So, and of course, they called it on their website, they called it a data security event, which probably sounds better than we were hacked because we don't have great security. But the spin doctors get in charge of that, and that's what happens. The government is working on something called the Securing Open Source Software Act, and that's probably a good thing. Open source software is important both to the government and private industry, including critical infrastructure. It's really underfunded in terms of how people are managing it. People say open source software is good because lots of people can look at it, but the reality is most open source software is not maintained at all, never mind looked at by a lot of people. And the reason is basically people and money, and until someone figures out an answer to that, it's going to be the same mess. But we're going to continue to use open source software, so we better fix it. Hopefully this law is a small step in the right direction. In the lawyers ought to know the law department, Kim Kardashian, who certainly, if she doesn't know the law, can hire folks that do know the law. She is a law student. She recently passed what's called the baby bar, which is a test that first-year law students are required to pass after their first year. It did take her 4 tries, but she did eventually pass it. She was hawking cryptocurrency, a particular kind of cryptocurrency, and it turns out that she got paid $250,000 for one Instagram post about this particular cryptocurrency. She forgot to mention in that post that she got paid $250,000 to make the post, and the feds kind of think that doesn't follow the law. So not only do they make her give back the $250,000, but they fined her $1 million in addition to that for not disclosing that she was a paid sponsor for this particular cryptocurrency company. She now says that she is cooperating with the feds, which I'm sure that's true because they could probably fine her a lot more than $1 million, and she doesn't want to be fined anything. But words of the wise, if you are an influencer, you better disclose that you're getting paid if in fact you're getting paid. If you're not getting paid, not a problem. And if you're not anybody that millions of people go off and can follow, then it probably doesn't matter either. But if you're either one of those, then you probably ought to go off and follow the rules and disclose that you're getting paid. Consumer Reports did a survey of a couple thousand people, and the numbers are a little bit optimistic. They're showing that there's some significant uptrends in people understanding and being concerned about privacy and security practices. And what's different here is this is not one of those surveys that says, well, if your bank was hacked, would you change banks? That's not really anything that you can really measure because you don't know whether people really would change banks if their bank got hacked. This is one, do you use multi-factor authentication? And that's a pretty binary thing. So, we're seeing significant upticks in basic hygiene. Part of that is going to be because companies like Google and Microsoft and other folks are forcing the issue and not giving them a choice. And the other is that companies are starting to get a little bit more serious about it as they get hacked, as they face lawsuits. And so those two together probably is increasing the adoption of good security practices. And the last thing is the security news bites for the week. The IRS says that people are facing a blizzard of text messages purporting to be from the IRS, telling you everything about, gee, we're going to throw you in jail. Gee, your tax return's bad. Gee, we owe you a refund, but we can't pay you. None of those are real. The IRS does not send text messages. And in fact, they don't even send emails. They only send letters. So if you get one of those messages, just delete it. Uber's former CISO was convicted of covering up a breach. This goes back to 2016. He did a bunch of bad stuff. Likely he was encouraged to do this by former management. They're not admitting that. He's not been sentenced yet, so we shall see what comes out in the sentencing thing. Does he turn state's witness for other Uber executives? I suspect that he was not alone in this. I would be really, really surprised about that. In the Department of Embarrassment Department, cyber insurance provider Lloyd's had to admit that they were breached. And that's not a great thing. I mean, I don't know how much data was actually lost as a result of that, but they did get breached. And finally, Facebook has discovered hundreds of both Apple and Android apps that are stealing credentials and sending them likely to China. So they've pulled off about 400 apps. From between both the iOS and Android app stores are asked those guys to pull them off. This is kind of a word to the wise. Make sure you don't give apps more permissions than they need. But if the app is asking you to log in with your credentials, then you really gotta wonder about whether or not they really need to do that. And certainly multi-factor authentication can help that. So that's what we have today. Hackers seem to be winning the battle of staying inside of company networks. There's a number of monitoring tools that we can help you with if you're concerned about that. If you do need help one way or the other, tools or otherwise, give us a holler. We'd be happy to assist you. And until next time, thanks for listening. Stay safe.
Turnkey Cybersecurity and Privacy Solutions offers the complete cybersecurity program for small to medium-sized businesses. They include everything needed to secure your business and meet compliance requirements. Visit our website at turnkeycybersecurityandprivacysolutions.com to learn more.